Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. The UK's first black British civil rights group, the British Equity Organisation, was launched this week with the aim of ending systemic racism in Britain. Its launch coincided with the 2-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. But does Britain need a black civil rights group? Well, here to debate this are actor and writer Femi Nylander and Conservative commentator and GBNews presenter Calvin Robinson. So, Femi, I'm going to come to you first. You've been involved in all sorts of activism yourself. You were involved with the Rose Must Fall campaign, for instance. We've spoken about that before. I noticed with this civil rights group, they're talking about equity specifically and structural racism. So do you think that there is an objective need to reckon with structural racism in the UK today?
I think there certainly is. And I think there's also certainly a concerted effort by certain elements of the society to hide the fact that structural racism exists. We saw with the Saul report a few years ago an active effort to say that there was no such thing as systemic racism in the UK. And the reality of the matter is that there are huge amounts of wealth disparities between minority groups and white citizens. Black people are up to 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched than white people in this country. We have black women 4 times more likely to die in childbirth because of disparities in healthcare, etc., etc. I can give you stats for days, and these are government stats. These aren't stats by groups which are necessarily biased towards the ideas of racial equality. And so I think it's a great thing, any organisation that takes it on the chin, that the UK does have a long way to go in matters of structural and systemic inequality. I think that's something we all need to work on.
Can I ask you about that? I mean, the Sewell report, the CRED report, as it was called, the Commission on Race and Racial Disparities, didn't deny that racism exists, or indeed didn't deny that there were racial disparities. What that report was suggesting was that it wasn't necessarily that there wasn't proof that that was down to something systemic, as in there weren't sort of, within teaching, for instance, there wasn't a conscious movement to try and prevent black people from doing well.
Well, I think systemic doesn't necessarily mean conscious. Systemic means within a system. So if I was to turn around now and shout a racial slur at someone in the audience, that would be an act of... I'm not going to, but that would be an act of racism. Yes. If, on the other hand, there was a particular system within a particular country or a particular school or a particular workspace which encouraged race without anyone needing to do anything overt, then that's what's called systemic racism. And I think it's clear that the UK has that.
Calvin, what do you make of Femi's view, then, that systemic racism is a major problem in the UK, that it is something that we need to fix?
Well, it's not. First of all, the CRED report didn't set out to hide systemic racism. It set out a very mixed bunch of people, a very ethnically diverse group of people set out to look at evidence and to find out if there is racism in the UK. And it found many, many, many racial disparities. But what it also found was that racial disparity is not proof of racism. And it didn't find any evidence of systemic racism. So it found individuals are racist within systems, sure, but that doesn't make the system racist. Now, to suggest that a system could be racist means that there is some kind of discrimination at play. And we have equality under the law in this country. So if a system is racist, then people can sue the system or sue the people within the system for discrimination. For example, you use some of the disparities. Black women tend to have more difficulties in childbirth than white women. These are cherry-picking statistics. Now, the Sewell report suggested we need to look at the wider picture, the bigger socio-economic factors at play, such as geography, class, deprivation. All of these have an impact on someone's life as well as their skin colour. So it's not only skin colour. But I could cherry-pick stats too and say, actually, if you look at cancer patients, black cancer patients have a higher survival rate than white cancer patients. Now, I would not assume that the NHS is somehow racist against white people with cancer. That would be nonsense. But I think it's just as ridiculous as people that suggest it the other way around.
I'll just come back to you in a moment. But Femi, so what do you think about this point that what Calvin is driving at here as well is this idea that interpreting disparity of outcome as evidence of racism is a flawed approach? Do you accept that that could be the case?
Well, I think, firstly, I'd like to see the actual stat on cancer, because if black people were 4 times more likely to survive cancer than white people in the UK, that would be very, very strange.
All of these stats from the Sewell report.
Well, but that's the thing. I mean, is it 10%? Is it 5%? Is it? I said 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. That's quite significant. That's not a statistic. It's not a statistical anomaly. And on the other hand, one of the things the Saul report did is it said, well, actually, the fact that black people may be more likely to be stopped and searched, or maybe is due to the fact that they're overrepresented in impoverished backgrounds, and the fact that black people are more likely to die of COVID might be due to the fact that they're more likely to be in social housing or in low-paid work. That is the system putting black people, or a system through which black people are more likely to be impoverished. If you had a system whereby you have ducks and geese are more likely to be in a horrible bit of the river, and ducks are more likely to be in a nice bit of the river, or anything, basically...
You'd still want to solve it.
You still want to solve it. The point of the matter is that if black people are more likely to be in poverty because of the fact that they are more likely to be maybe from the Caribbean, they're more likely to be people of the Windrush generation, people who literally came from a country which was a slave colony of the UK to the UK to help build the UK, invited by the UK government, under the Windrush scandal, many of them forcibly ejected, then the fact that they are overrepresented in impoverished council estates is itself an aspect of systemic racism. It's not something you can point at and say, well, actually, it's a matter of class. You can't pit class. You can't pit class against racism.
Do you accept that, Calvin? I mean, Femi's argument that racism and racist systems can exist irrespective of intention, actually. They can be built in. I mean, you could say that the housing situation in America with redlining and the idea that it's true that black families living today are still suffering from the racial segregation of the past. That's true, isn't it?
Yes, but America has a very different system to what we have. We haven't had slaves in the UK. We've got a very different black history, because black history is British history. As Femi pointed out, people from the Caribbean were invited over to Britain and came over. My grandparents came over very proud to be British Commonwealth citizens and very proud to join the United Kingdom. The difference here, I think Femi is very, very close. If there's a part of the river that is disenfranchised or impoverished, you improve that whole part of the river, not just for the black ducks. This is the issue. Yes, there are parts of our inner cities where black people are disproportionately stopped and searched, for example. That's because black people in those areas are disproportionately in taking part in crime. Knife crime with injury, 70% of criminals are black and ethnic minorities.
Do you not think there's an element of racism to the choice of the people that the police stop?
The racism isn't the people stopping. The racism is the black-on-black crime. We need to affect these areas.
Let's bring Femi in on
most stopping and searching isn't actually about knife crime. Most stopping and searching is about drug offences. And the stats show that white people and black people... when you look, in London specifically, you have knife crime, but across the country, most stopping and searching is about drug offences. And the stats show that white people are just as likely to smoke weed as black people, but black people are much more likely to go to jail for smoking weed because of the fact that, like you see with the child Q, where they saw a black girl, a 15-year-old black girl, in a classroom, and two police officers took her to a back room and strip-searched her because the teacher said they smelt weed.
Right, so into an individual case there, but you're onto something. So in drug crime in particular, 70% of drug criminals are white, whereas 86% of the British population is white. So there's still a disproportionality there in that black people are committing more crimes in that area. But when we talk about why black people are going into prison more than white people, that's not systemic. That's not because the judges or the police are racist. That's because black people tend to plead not guilty more than white people who tend to plead guilty, and you get lesser sentence if you plead guilty. So they're playing the system. It's not that the system is against them. It's using the same structures that we all have access to in a different way.
7 times more? young black people...
Yes, absolutely.
So I think if you look at the actual stats behind the people who are taken to trial who are black, so let's not talk about not guilty. You have to be taken to trial first. Yeah. And the people who are taken to trial themselves are much more likely to be black.
No, I just said, in drug crime, it's 70% white people, so they're much more likely to be white, actually. Those are the statistics from the government website.
Can we talk about possible solutions, though? Everyone accepts that racism still exists within the country, right?
A solution is, we can't have movements that say, well, we are black civil rights movements, because there are no civil rights that black people do not have in this country. That is a divisive ideology based on critical race theory, based on American politics, of pitting black people against white people. What we have to do is look at our society and look at areas of deprivation and fix them for everybody, no matter what their skin colour.
So you think the name of this new civil rights group is a problem? The fact that they're implying...
What rights do they want that they don't already have?
Femi?
Civil rights for black people in the UK. Black civil rights, and you say that it's a horrible thing that's come from America. When we look at... I was taught in school, I was taught about the civil rights struggle in America. I wasn't taught anything about the civil rights struggle in the UK, which is long and very, very vibrant. And I was taught about Malcolm X, I was taught about Martin Luther King, I was taught about the NAACP, all of these things. And they're great things which have led to the deconstruction. And you mentioned as well that the legal status of black people means that they have rights. Again, when we look at Jim Crow, what was the terminology? Separate but equal.
You're talking about American politics.
Well, let's not talk about American politics. Let's talk about the UK.
America had slaves in their country. They fought a long battle.
The UK had slaves. They just took them over to the Caribbean.
They never had slaves in this country.
Okay. If I have a personal slave...
In this country,
black
people have exactly the same rights as white people. Men have exactly the same rights as women. You know, we are an equal country. We have equality under the law. If you feel like someone is discriminating against you, you can take them to court.
But do you think that Femi's view that, you know, we should be taught, though, about the British complicity in the slave trade? I mean, it's true that there weren't slaves here, but they were certainly trading.
It's a part of the national curriculum. We learn about the British Empire, the British colonies. We hear about immigration. It's all on the curriculum. Look it up. I mean, you can say you didn't learn it, but maybe you didn't remember being taught it, or maybe you were taught it poorly, or maybe it wasn't on the curriculum when you were in school. But it certainly is now. I can tell you as a teacher, deputy head, governor, that it is on the curriculum.
So do you think that things have changed, maybe that people are now, that there are improvements here, that those gaps within education are being filled? And
I mean, it's perfectly correct that there is now some teaching of empire in schools, and that's largely because of the movements like Rhodes Must Fall, which have pushed for the decolonisation.
No, they were on the curriculum before Rhodes Must Fall. These are extremist people that are destroying our society by tearing down public monuments and statues that belong to all of us, not just a particular demographic, and making a mess of our race relations, which was very, very strong until groups like Black Lives Matter came along and caused division where it didn't exist to begin with.
Do you think, Femi, that there is... do you take on board the argument that when people talk about systemic racism and when they can't necessarily point to any evidence other than disparity of outcome, that people are sceptical about that? And
I think people who are sceptical about racist... I mean, people who think that the fact that black people are so much less, especially black Caribbean people, are so much less likely to succeed in education in the UK, and they say, well, you can't say that racism is a factor. Well, then what's the other factor? You think that black people are stupider than white people? You think that they're less hardworking than white people? Or maybe there's a problem with the education system. Maybe there's a problem by which these children aren't encouraged. Maybe there's a problem by which these students are much more likely to go to underperforming schools because of the fact that they're in impoverished situations, and they're less represented in the high-performing grammar schools and the private schools, etc. And when you look at the facts, the facts back this up. This is true. You just have to read the statistics.
Close again. You're very, very close. So it's a case of, in schools, we're telling black people, that the young black kids, that they are victims. We're telling them that they're held back. We're telling them that there are hurdles against them and they'll never succeed. So they start to believe that. That's where the racism comes from. We are putting it on them. We're teaching them racism.
We are short of time, so I just want to give a final word now to Femi on the basis of what Calvin's just argued. What do you think of that?
I don't know black parents that tell their kids that they're rubbish and they have no time to succeed. I know that there are teachers within schools, and again, teachers and university professors, especially minorities, are very, very, very underrepresented in the education system in terms of not only the university sector, but also in terms of people who are teaching within schools. And I know that there are a lot of teachers who are not giving black students in the country what they need and not necessarily helping them succeed. And having students learn the reality of the UK's history, the reality of colonialism, the reality of the slave trade. And I don't think that the fact that the UK didn't have slaves in the country, the Windrush generation are the descendants of UK slaves. They're descendants of people who worked for free.
All of that's on the curriculum. What do you want?
No, but I'm saying, what's the difference between the fact that the US had slaves there and the UK had slaves in the Caribbean? I'll tell you what the difference is. It becomes easier for UK people to ignore it.
No, the difference is black Americans have a very different culture to black Brits.
I'm going to have to... This is a fascinating debate, and I'm sure we can go on a long, long time. Thank you both ever so much for coming on to discuss this. Femi and Calvin, everyone.